It was Sunday morning, December 7, 1941. Across the island of Oahu, Americans were beginning what seemed like an ordinary day. At Pearl Harbor, sailors ate breakfast. Ships rested quietly in the harbor. Some men were preparing for work. Others were thinking about a day of rest. Nobody standing there could imagine what was about to happen. More than 150 American vessels were in or around Pearl Harbor that morning. The battleships of the Pacific Fleet were lined up near Ford Island. To the sailors aboard them, the harbor felt safe. Pearl Harbor was home, and home was not supposed to be a battlefield. But hundreds of miles away, another force was already moving. A Japanese carrier fleet had crossed the Pacific in secrecy. Its destination was Oahu. Its mission was simple: strike the American Pacific Fleet before the United States could react. At 7:02 that morning, two young American radar operators saw something unusual. Joseph Lockard and George Elliott were working at the Opana radar station on Oahu's north shore. Their screen showed a massive formation approaching from the north. The aircraft was still roughly 130 miles away. Lockard and Elliott reported what they were seeing, but the officer receiving the report believed the aircraft might be American B-17 bombers expected to arrive from the mainland. No major alarm was raised. The radar operators had seen the danger, but nobody understood what they were looking at. The approaching aircraft were not American. They were the first wave of the Japanese attack force. More than 180 aircraft were heading toward Oahu, and they were getting closer every minute. The men at Pearl Harbor still had no idea. At approximately 7:55 a.m., the first Japanese aircraft reached Pearl Harbor. The peaceful Sunday morning was over. Torpedo bombers dropped toward the ships. Dive bombers attacked the airfields. Fighters swept across Oahu. Within seconds, Pearl Harbor became a battlefield. The first explosions ripped across the harbor. Sailors ran toward their battle stations. Some had barely finished breakfast. Others were still below deck. Then came a message that would become one of the most famous warnings in American military history. Air raid Pearl Harbor. This is not a drill. The Japanese attack was not limited to the ships. American aircraft were also attacked on the ground. At Wheeler, Hickam, Bellows, Ewa, and Kaneohe, planes were being destroyed before many could even take off. The goal was to prevent American pilots from fighting back. At Pearl Harbor, the Japanese aircraft concentrated on the American battleships. The ships were packed closely together. That made them powerful targets. One after another, explosions erupted across the harbor, and then the attack reached the USS Arizona. The USS Arizona was a massive battleship. More than 1,500 men were aboard her that morning. Then, shortly after 8 a.m., a bomb penetrated the ship. It reached the forward ammunition magazines. For a moment there was silence. Then Arizona exploded. The explosion tore through the forward part of the ship. Fire rose high above Pearl Harbor. Metal and debris were thrown into the air. The Arizona was sinking, and hundreds of men were trapped aboard her. By the end of the attack, 1,177 crewmen from Arizona had died. But the Americans were not simply waiting to die. Across the harbor, sailors grabbed machine guns. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. Men ran through smoke and burning decks to reach their weapons. Within minutes, American guns were firing back. The first wave eventually pulled away. For a brief moment, the harbor seemed almost quiet. But the attack was not over. A second wave of Japanese aircraft was already approaching. The Americans had only minutes to prepare. The second wave struck the harbor and nearby military installations. Bombs fell, aircraft burned, ships struggled to maneuver through the narrow waters. The Americans fought back with everything they had, but the damage was already immense. One American battleship, USS Nevada, managed to get underway. She moved toward the harbor entrance. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that she might escape, but Japanese aircraft concentrated on her. To prevent the harbor channel from being blocked, Nevada was eventually forced to beach. By now, Pearl Harbor looked nothing like it had that morning. Oil covered the water, ships were burning, aircraft wreckage covered the airfields, smoke climbed into the Hawaiian sky. The surprise was gone. Now there was only war. Shortly before 10 a.m., the Japanese aircraft began leaving Oahu. The attack was over. Less than 2 hours had passed, but the United States had suffered one of the worst military disasters in its history. More than 2,400 Americans were killed in the attack. More than 1,100 others were wounded. 21 ships were sunk or damaged. Hundreds of American aircraft were destroyed or damaged. But one number would remain burned into the American memory: 2,403 dead. Among the dead were 1,177 men from the USS Arizona. Their ship would never return to service. The wreck remained beneath the waters of Pearl Harbor, and decades later it would become one of America's most powerful war memorials. But the story of Pearl Harbor did not end when the guns stopped. The next day, Americans woke up in a different country. The question was no longer whether the United States would enter the war. The question was what America would do next. On December 8th, President Franklin Roosevelt appeared before Congress. He spoke about the attack that had happened less than 24 hours earlier. His message was direct. America had been attacked, and America would respond. Across America, families gathered around radios. Workers stopped to listen. Newspapers rushed into the streets. The attack in Hawaii was no longer a distant event. It had become personal. America was going to war. In the days that followed, Americans lined up to volunteer. Factories began preparing for war. Young men entered military service. The country began transforming itself for a conflict unlike anything it had experienced before. The United States declared war on Japan. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. The attack on Pearl Harbor had transformed a distant global conflict into America's war. The Japanese attack had inflicted enormous damage, but it had not destroyed everything. American aircraft carriers were not in Pearl Harbor that morning. Many damaged ships would eventually return to service, and the American industrial machine was still intact. Pearl Harbor had shocked America, but the attack also united a nation. Millions of Americans who had never expected to fight overseas suddenly had a reason to fight. The country entered the war with anger, fear, and determination. Across the Pacific, the war would become brutal. American sailors and Marines would fight from island to island. Pilots would battle over oceans thousands of miles from home, and the men who survived Pearl Harbor would carry the memory with them. For many survivors, December 7th was not simply a date in a history book. It was a morning they could remember, minute by minute. The sound of aircraft, the explosions, the smoke, the screams, and the moment they realized that their world had changed forever. Today, Pearl Harbor is quiet again. Tourists walk beside the water. Ships pass through the harbor, and beneath that peaceful surface, the USS Arizona remains, a silent reminder of the morning America went to war. More than 80 years later, their names are still remembered. They were sailors, Marines, soldiers, civilians. Most were young. Many had expected nothing more from December 7th than an ordinary Sunday. That is what makes Pearl Harbor so powerful. History often looks inevitable when we see it from the future, but on that morning, nobody knew what was coming. There was only another Sunday, another sunrise, another ordinary day, until it wasn't. 2 young radar operators had seen the aircraft coming. The warning had existed, but the meaning of that warning had been misunderstood. Less than an hour later, Japanese bombs were falling on Pearl Harbor. At 7:55 in the morning, America was still at peace. By 10 o'clock, that peace was gone. In less than 2 hours, the coast of American history had changed. The following day, Roosevelt stood before Congress. He asked for a declaration of war. The vote was swift. America had made its decision. The United States would fight. The road ahead would cost America thousands of lives. There would be battles in the Pacific, battles in Europe, years of sacrifice. But everything began with that Sunday morning in Hawaii. Today, the harbor is quiet. The water moves gently above the wreckage of the Arizona. There are no aircraft overhead, no bombs falling, no alarms, only the memory of those who never came home. Pearl Harbor is remembered not only because America was attacked. It is remembered because thousands of ordinary people suddenly found themselves inside one of the defining moments of the 20th century. They did not know they were making history. They were simply trying to survive it. December 7th, 1941. A Sunday morning, a surprise attack, a harbor transformed by fire, and a nation that would never be the same again. The guns have been silent for generations, but the memory remains. Because sometimes history changes in years, and sometimes It changes in a single morning, December 7, 1941, the morning America went to war.